when I'm teaching, right? Couple minutes before class. The Maserati's in fifth gear already, but it's, can't get out of the chute. You have to wait for the clock. Yeah. Maybe my phone is slow. See, that's what I have too. Right. That's what I'm afraid of. They're just waking up from their nap. Okay, we're getting closer. Well, if I was a joke teller, I would tell you a great joke, but all of my jokes that I would get anyway come from my friend from Toronto. He's a Christian lawyer, and he has the funniest jokes. And of course, the first thing he'll tell you is, I understand that being a Christian and a lawyer at the same time is an oxymoron, but he does have the best lawyer jokes too. All right, we are on. It is 7:30. Let's pray, and then off we go. Let's get out of the starting gate. Lord, thank you for today, for this evening, for the opportunity that we have to go back into the annals of history to look at some of the things that went on that are described in your word. Thank you for the amazing stories that are in the Bible that aren't just folk tales or legends, but are accountings of real events that happened, that sometimes defy the mind, sometimes stretch the faith, sometimes require us to step out beyond ourselves or the conventions of our world around us, but we believe that your word is true and that it is potent and that it reflects what you did in history in the lives of the Israelites, the ancient Israelites, and in the church age for all the believers of all walks of life who came after them and who were able to benefit from the spiritual blessings of Abraham that came through Messiah, Jesus. Thank you for the privilege that we have of being your children and for the certainty we have of joining you forever on the new earth eventually, where all things will be made new, where there's no night, there's no darkness, there's no sin, there's no sorrow, there are no tears. But you, in the form of Jesus, will be with us for all time to come and beyond time, into infinity. And so we look forward to all that awaits according to what you have promised to be true. So bless our time and encourage us through it. Give us an understanding of a little bit of what you did in one window in time, that we might give you glory and honor for which you're due. So we pray these things in the name of Christ. Amen. All right, folks, so I guess you're going to do without your announcements tonight. I'm not good on your announcements. I would do well enough with, it'd be a challenge enough with my own, but with yours, I'm not going to do well at all. All right, I did provide a handout for you. You should have it. If you don't, Cheryl can probably tell you where to get one. There should be some left over. This handout is basically a reference sheet. It's not something that that I will be looking at with you throughout the evening. We're not trying to go through all of these archaeological ages. Basically, this is a summary, kind of a full chart of all of the known archaeological periods in the Levant. What is the Levant? Well, if you don't already know, and actually if you were here with me when I was here with you last, year and a half or two or whatever ago, whatever date that was, I spoke of the Levant as the place that's to the northeast of Egypt, and of course Israel is in the Levant. It's the southern Levant, where Israel's located. Used to be Canaan before that. And then to the north of it is the northern Levant. But altogether, it's the Levant. So the northern Levant consists of Phoenicia on the coast and then Syria, ancient Syria above. So that all of that area is known as the Levant. And it has kind of its own archaeological footprint, if you will. And that can be defined according to the periods that are represented there based on excavations that are done. So it goes all the way back to the Lower Paleolithic, and it moves all the way forward, at least for my purposes and where I stop. And it continues, but I stop at the end of the Roman period, specifically the late Roman period. And I've given you dates, parameters for each one of the periods and subperiods that are involved there. And I mainly give you this because with what I'm going to talk about tonight, I'll be using these terms that are found on this handout. And really, without the handout, it'll be a little bit challenging unless you have a background in the archaeology of the Levant. So whenever I'm referring to a certain period, and most of the periods I'll be referring to are in the middle of the page, those subperiods of the Middle Bronze Age and especially of the Late Bronze Age, okay? So when you hear me refer to one of those periods and you're thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, when does that occur in time? Look on the handout yourself, on your own, to kind of gauge yourself to where that fits. But I will kind of set a couple things in context here. For those of you who were here last time with me, does anyone remember the year in which Jacob entered or left Canaan and entered Egypt with his family? What year was that? Nobody? 1876 BC. So look on the chart and see where that fits in. It's halfway down the page. Middle Bronze 2A, 1900 to 1750. Do you see that? That's where Jacob fits. So he leaves the Levant in the Middle Bronze Age 2A period, and he goes down into Egypt with his family. And when do they surface? What's the year of the Exodus where they leave Egypt? 1446. So where does that fall? Look at your chart again. Go down into the Late Bronze Age subperiods, and you can see from 1840 approximately to 1400. And most of these numbers, by the way, are approximate, kind of our best guess at this. And that's Late Bronze 1B. So it's during Late Bronze 1B that the Exodus occurs. And then when do the Israelites enter Canaan? What's that year? 1406. And where does that fall? That falls, and actually the whole conquest period, the official conquest under Joshua, right? They never really finished the whole job that they were assigned to do. But under Joshua, it lasts from 1406 to 1400. So it's roughly 7 years of time, 6 to 7 years of time. And that fits right at the very end of Late Bronze 1A, 1B, I'm sorry, as we understand it now at the moment. I always reserve the right to edit this, to change, to improve dates on my own archaeological timeline, but for now, this is kind of the best that I can do. So that gives you a little bit of context, right? Well, what is it that we want to do tonight? Tonight, we want to kind of piggyback off of what Pastor Dean has done in recent weeks, mainly in relation to the conquest and the effort that the Israelites exerted to conquer the peoples in the north, in the northern part of the southern Levant, if you will, or northern Canaan, and specifically at the time of the destruction of Hazor. So the northern campaign was the last part of the overall campaign to conquer Canaan. It began, if you remember, when they destroyed Jericho, and then they basically went due west toward the Mediterranean Sea, but they had to climb uphill up the central mountain spine, and then they went to Ai and Gibeon and so forth, and they basically cut a line across all the way, and then they went to the south and they conquered cities and peoples in the Negev, in the southern part of Canaan, and then they moved to the north and went all the way up to the northern extremity of Canaan. And Hazor, of course, was the key or chief city in the north. So it was a monumental undertaking to conquer Hazor. I wish I could have been there to see all of these events unfold. It would have been startling. And even if you compare the north to the south, there's no city in southern Canaan anything like Hazor in the north. Not even close. It's bigger and better and sturdier and stronger and more well-defended than any of the other cities. So, of course, if you remember the text in Joshua 11, somehow the Israelites found a way, or God found a way, to move the northern armies out of their own cities and into an area where there could be a battle between the two. And that's where the Israelites essentially won the day. And then, in fact, they chased the northern city-states, or the armies of the northern city-states, all the way down to the coast to Sidon and defeated them. And then they came all the way back and conquered the cities of the north, especially Hazor. And that's the one that's the main city described in that northern campaign. So that's kind of a picture of a brief picture of what happened. But we want to look at the destruction of Hazor for a couple reasons. But we want to look at it, with me at least, from an archaeologist's point of view. Being that this is my background, my PhD is in archaeology, I just wanted to kind of give you that complementary area that can work together with the biblical text to show you a little bit better some of the things that went on. And I think you'll be fascinated by a little bit of the evidence that's involved here. And there's something else that comes into play in all of this, and that is this. If you look at sources, mainly books and excavation reports that were produced by Israeli scholars, most of them nowadays, most Israeli scholars, will tell you that the destruction of Hazor, at whatever period at the end of the Canaanite period, near the end of the Canaanite period, whatever destruction of the city that you see, it's not the Israelites who are responsible for this destruction. That's what they'll tell you. And the few who do tell you that there was a destruction by the Israelites, they'll tell you that it happened at the final Canaanite occupation, and that you can look on your sheet, on your archaeological periodization timeline there, where it says Late Bronze 2B from 1305 to 1187. So within that window, and around 1234 BC, is the destruction of the final Canaanite city of Hazor. So in roughly 1234 BC, the Canaanites were destroyed at Hazor. They were killed off and never to return. Never again after roughly 1234 did Canaanites inhabit the city as their own. Okay? And so the few Israeli scholars who tell you that the Israelites are responsible for that destruction will tell you that the story you read about in Joshua 11 and the story you read in Judges 4, both describing defeats of the king of Hazor and his forces, those Israeli scholars will tell you those should be conflated into one narrative. There was one destruction, not two different ones. There was one. Right? Does that make sense? So I would tell you one happened at the end of Late Bronze 1B, and you can look on your sheet if you need to know where that is, and one happened at the end of Late Bronze 2B. The first one under Joshua, the second one under Deborah and Barak. Now, when I published an article, I used to be part of the Hazor excavations. So I was last there as an excavator in 2007 and had a great relationship with Amnon Ben-Tor, the chief excavator, and in my area, the area supervisor was Sharon Zuckerman, who passed away a few years back because of cancer. I had a great relationship with her until I published a peer-reviewed journal article which stated that there were two Israelite destructions of Hazor, one at the end of Late Bronze 1 and one at the end of Late Bronze 2. That threw me into the doghouse. I was literally kicked off of the dig. I was unceremoniously removed and not able to go back and participate in the dig. Can you imagine that? Just for publishing an article that gives an opinion. What if I was wrong, right? Is it such a bad thing to publish an opinion these days? Is it so hard? So you can see the prejudice that exists against someone who will hold to biblical historicity in the period of the ancient Israelites. It is extremely problematic. And I had to miss out on future digs that I was going to be excited about participating in to see what would happen at Hazor. So that shows you what's at stake, doesn't it? And so tonight, if we have time to get there, hopefully we will, I'll be showing you evidence from the destruction under Joshua and the destruction under Deborah and Barak. Almost certainly we'll get to the Joshua. Hopefully we will to the Deborah and Barak as well. But we want to work our way there a little bit. So here we go. Let's start with a map of Hazor's location. Where is the city of Hazor in Israel? Now, the map I have for you, this is known as an east-facing map. Does anyone know why we would have an east-facing map? Not to confuse. Not because it lays out better, and it does. Because the Israelis don't see north as up, right? They see east as up. Why? Because civilization came from the east, right? Abram came from the east. If you look on a map where the land of Canaan is, Abram came from Ur of the Chaldeans, right? And he didn't go through the desert to get to Canaan. He probably went along the Euphrates River and up into Syria and then down into the Levant and the southern Levant. So anyway, it's an east-facing map, and the white arrow there points to the site of Hazor right here. It's to the north of the Sea of Galilee, so north is to our left. It's to the north of the Sea of Galilee. There used to be a Lake Hula, and if you're used to, kind of the old school Bible maps, you remember two lakes there, Galilee and then Hula. Hula's gone. It's been absorbed into farmland. So the Sea of Galilee is there, of course, today. Some of you probably have seen that, I imagine, right? Some of you have seen the Sea of Galilee. Yep. So Hazor is here. It's in the Jordan Rift Valley, which goes north and south. And if I didn't mention this the last time I was with you, the Jordan Rift Valley is one of the longest and most intense, severe fault lines in the entire world. It's part of the Afro-Arabian fault line, which goes all the way down to Mozambique in Africa, which, if you don't know, that's close to South Africa. That's in southern Africa. And it goes all the way north through the Sinai, up here through the Arabah in the Jordan Rift Valley, and then all the way north through Syria, up into the Amanus Mountains in modern Turkey. How's that for a fault line? And so when you read about earthquake activity that takes place in the Bible and in Israel, it's because of this major fault line that runs north and south. And of course, Hazor is right in that fault line. Hazor could easily have a massive earthquake that just destroys everything there if the epicenter is really close to the site. So anyway, so that's where Hazor is located. And of course, that's in northern Canaan. So most of Canaan is to the southwest of this. You can see Mount Carmel here, where Elijah was, and the Jezreel Valley here, and Beit Shan here, and Megiddo here, and you probably know about these kinds of cities. So, and the rest of the sites in the southern Levant are further off the screen to the right, down south. Okay, so let's give a little background to Hazor, which is also known in Arabic as Tel El-Kedah. So, ancient Hazor consists of a rectangular lower city, about 170 acres if you're a farmer and know those numbers, and a bottle-shaped upper city of about 30 acres. Essentially, an elongated mound called a tel. And if you have Israelis writing about a tel, they'll spell it T-E-L, whereas Arabs or Palestinians will spell it T-E-L-L. Same word, same idea. A tel is a mound, basically. It's topographically, it's a rise in the terrain. And so in ancient times, of course, the upper ground is strategically where you want to be, so you would build a city, most often, on top of a tell to protect yourselves so that if anyone came after you, they would have to climb up the hill and attack you from below. And you have the advantage because you have the high ground. So this rises about 40 meters above the surrounding plain. At the time of the city's height during the Late Bronze Age, and by the way, that is during Joshua's day, Hazor was at its ultimate height as a city in the ancient world in Joshua's day. The population is estimated to have been 40,000 residents. Now, how big is that comparatively? Well, Hazor was 4 times larger than Lachish, which is in the Shephelah, that's the southwestern part of Canaan, the second largest site in Canaan, and 20 times larger than Jerusalem. How's that for size? Massive city. Why is it so such a large city? Why such a great population? Because this is the first site in Canaan that you hit on the international highway known as the Great Trunk Road that goes from the east, from Mesopotamia and beyond, right, into the southern Levant. And then, of course, if you want to go into Egypt, that's the route you take. So the first major site on that path when you hit the southern Levant is Hazor. So it makes sense that it would be the largest city. John Garstang took initial soundings at the tell in 1926. Yigael Yadin, an Israeli one-time soldier who turned archaeologist, excavated at Hazor from 1955 to 58, and then 68 and 69, 2 seasons combined, which produced some of the most outstanding finds in the entire Holy Land. So you can go to Hazor today, and if the Archaeological Museum is open in COVID times, it's worth seeing some of the artifacts that are there. They're fantastic. So I highly recommend it. Amnon Ben Tor, who dug under Yadin as an assistant to him, assistant archaeologist, when Yadin had kind of gone off, maybe he had died by then, or he had gone or retired, whichever it was. It was Ben Tor who resumed excavations there in 1990, and those excavations have continued from then until today. And he's just recently turned it over to younger archaeologists. A major thrust of the current excavations, notably in Area M, where I dug, is the hunt for a cuneiform archive. And of course, a cuneiform archive means what? A written record. These are the clay tablets that have usually Akkadian writing on them, and tell us lots of things about those people. And there's no better artifact that you can have from antiquity than a writing. Why? Because you're getting it word of mouth from the people firsthand. That's why. There's nothing more important. And at the site, every once in a while, a fragment, usually broken off from a clay tablet, will be found, and maybe it can be read, maybe not, maybe it's too fragmentary, but that shows you that somewhere on the site there's an archive or more, and they just haven't been discovered. And that's really what the archaeologists want more than anything, is to find that archive. Even in my time there, we were hoping that we would stumble on the archive, but we didn't. Recent digging took the newest squares down to the final stratum of the Late Bronze Age. Archives could exist for Middle Bronze II, Late Bronze I, and or Late Bronze II. So that's, so Middle Bronze II would be just before Moses, the birth of Moses, Late Bronze I, in Joshua's day, Late Bronze II, in Deborah and Barak's day, in the day of the Judges. Information relevant to biblical studies certainly may be found if there is such a cuneiform archive discovered. But there is something exciting in the written record that was preserved that dates to the time of Joshua that we'll be looking at together a little bit later. Let's look at a few views of the mound, especially now that you have these new super duper high powered projectors that give you the chance to see pictures. All right, first, this is kind of an old black and white drawing just to give you a look from above at what we're talking about with Hazor. So looking to the left half of the screen, this area here is the lower city. Remember I told you that the city consists of two parts, the lower city and the upper city. And of course the upper city is higher in elevation. And remember I said it was bottle-shaped? There it is right there, the bottle-shaped upper part of the tell. And this is in basically the tell itself, the mound, is in the southeastern corner of the site, of the entire site. And by the way, I will note something really important for you to know. When the Israelites took over the site, it was, okay, when the destruction happened around 1234 BC, and the last Canaanite settlement was destroyed and the people were all killed off under Deborah and Barak, the site sat fallow for some time. It wasn't until about the 11th century that all of a sudden some Israelites had the bright idea, hey, we need to, resettle this Hazor city that's kind of sitting and rotting there up in the north. So they did. They came, but the point I want to make is they came to the upper city, to the tell, and they established an enclave there. But the entire lower city, they just left it. They never settled it. In fact, never in the history of Israel, ever, ancient Israel, never was the lower city occupied. Isn't that strange? You have 40,000 people there in the time of probably the Amorites. But in the Israelite period, the monarchy, they don't even touch it. They don't go there. They only inhabit the upper city. And so the upper city, now that you see at the bottom here of this left photograph or drawing, is what you see on the right. So you take that bottle and you turn it upright. And now we have our bottle here, and that's the tell. So the Israelites occupied in the top of this area B, that's kind of the corner of the tell. They occupied the area that goes down on both sides all the way to this little V shape. And the V shape is where they built a wall. There was not a wall that existed there in the Canaanite time. They built this wall, and here was their gate right here. And that area in here was their occupational area. They didn't occupy all of this. They just, I don't know, maybe farmed it or something, but it wasn't occupied. They didn't live there. They didn't build houses there. That wasn't inside their city. That was outside of their city. So not only did they ignore the entire massive lower city, but they only had a part, roughly a half. I think that's roughly a half of the tell. And that's it. That's as large as the city was in the Israelite period. Isn't that strange? Just the way it was. Okay, and this is another image. So the image on the left basically gives you kind of an older photograph showing some of the excavations that were done. So area B is up here, right, corresponding to this. And area L is in this area, and then area A in here, and then area M is over here. And that's where I dug. This is just an aerial view to give you a picture of what it would look like if you were to see it maybe from a helicopter or something like that. So the lower city is kind of in the upper part of your picture here, not fully upper. The hills are in the largest, or in the highest point, but it's all this, right? It's all of this, and then the tell is right here, and you can see a little bit how much higher the tell is than the lower city here. That's another view to give you a little bit bigger and better picture of how large the lower city was that, again, was occupied by the Amorites and the Canaanites, but not by the Israelites. And another view, and this gives you even a little bit better sense of the height differential between the lower city and the tell. And there's a focus just on the tell itself in more recent times, but you can see there's still visible signs of excavation all over the mound, even though it's not fully excavated. And by the way, Ben Tor, the excavator there, while I was part of the dig, I asked him if you were to excavate here at Hazor, how long would it take you to excavate the entire site? You know what he told me? about 600 years. 600 years of excavations for all of it. It's that big. Isn't that incredible? And who knows what's there that we haven't even found? Probably a lot of pretty exciting finds. So, and here's a black and white, another view of the tell back in the days of Yigael Yadin in the 50s and 60s. All right, so now let's work our way toward the Canaanite, the Amorite period when Joshua destroyed the city, and then hopefully we can get our way to the destruction under Deborah and Barak. So we start with the Middle Bronze Age 2B to give us a context. In the upper city, the excavators called that the pre-Stratum 17 level. In the lower city, that's known as Stratum, Arabic number 4. And the time period is roughly 800 to 1560 BC. Or in the 1700s. We're not really sure exactly when they started inhabiting it. So the earliest written record of Hazor is found in the Egyptian execration texts. You can Google execration text if you want. I'd explain it, but I really want to get us to where we need to be. Dating to around 1800 BC. Hazor is also mentioned in the archives at Mari. There's an important ancient Amorite site known as Mari. We'll see it on a map in a minute, which date from 1827 to 1757, probably equating the earliest settlement at the site to the final decades of the Middle Bronze Age 2A. So Mari is one of the cities of this Amorite coalition, and it had an archive that was found, right? Like we want to find at Hazor. And Hazor is mentioned as a city and a site in their archives at Mari, which tells us there was, unless they're just fabricating all this, which is extremely doubtful, there was an actual city, Amorite city, that they were probably trading with and working with in some way that was down in Canaan, and their texts reflect the existence of an occupation there, of a city there, of whatever size. Some structures and burials exist from Middle Bronze Age 2A, but conventional thought dates the initial occupational level to Middle Bronze Age 2B, which begins in about 1750 BC. The first fortifications and ramparts of the lower city were built at this time, and the buildings in Area C show that the city's enclosure began there. So here is a picture of the ancient world, looking at it through the lens of this Amorite coalition that existed. So the easternmost city in the coalition was Babylon. So Babylon had its own large city and its own archives and its own organized society. It was, of course, one of the main organized civilizations of the time. And then Mari comes next in the line, and that's in the center. And then Al-Alaq, which is in the Amuk plain, and that's in southeastern Turkey today. I was part of a dig very close to Alaq at a site called Tel Tayanat. Then Katna, that's in ancient Syria. And then down here, and this is our friend Hazor. So all of these cities communicated with one another during the Middle Bronze Age 2A, the lifetime of Jacob and Joseph, and they interacted and traded and probably protected each other in some ways. Okay, Stratum 4, and that's now in the lower city, right? The Arabic numbers reflect the occupational levels in the lower city of Hazor. The discoveries in the lower city indicate that a large city was established and thrived at Hazor during Middle Bronze Age 2B. Moreover, the upper city must have been inhabited side by side with the lower city. So it wasn't just one or the other, they were both inhabited at the same time. And obviously, on the tell, you would have the king, right? The king's going to be in the place that's most protected. And probably all the most important temples were up there, connected with him and probably the patron deity of Hazor, and probably the richest people, the aristocrats, if you will, of the day, would have been in the tell. And all of the kind of less important people, less financially well-off people were down in the lower city. That's just the way it goes. Folks, it's the same in history, right? It doesn't change. Excavations in areas A, B, G, L, and AB show that the Tell was densely populated and highly fortified during the Middle Bronze II period. The results from excavations under Ben Tor in the 90s suggest that the city's population during this time was about 20,000. So it's been moving up since its foundation, right? It's been moving up. Remember that site that it occupied, the position it occupied in that Amorite coalition. This is, if you look at the Fertile Crescent, this is the left end of it. So lots of people would be coming to Hazor, building up the population. So now it's 20,000 strong, making Hazor the largest and most important city in the entire southern Levant already. So even at this time, it was the largest. There was no city over 20. Lachish had 20, but nobody over. Excavations in Area F yielded rock-cut tombs with an elaborate network of connecting tunnels. As a rule, they consisted of large rectangular shafts with caves hewn in varying shapes that branched from their bases. The rampart or defensive wall was erected during this time, which is known from how the construction of the earliest temple in Stratum 3 was after the leveling of Area H and the filling up of the ground level up to the edge of the rampart. Stratum 4's gate was situated slightly to the rear of the natural slope and was approached by means of a gradual ascent constructed of beaten earth laid in alternate layers of basaltic flakes and clays, crushed yellowish chalk rock, and brown brick clay. This gate, and of course every ancient city, if it built a wall, a defensive wall, it had to have a gate, right? You needed to let your own people in and out and approved visitors. So the gate, of course, was the weakest point in any defensive wall because it has natural cracks, right? No matter what it's made of, wood or stone or whatever, it's going to have cracks. So you can, wedge it open, or you can, if it's wooden, you light it on fire and it burns, and then you get your way into the city or whatever. So the gate is the important feature of the wall, and it's your access area and the area that you have to defend the most. So this gate, which is similar to the southern gate at Gezer, apparently had a number of pilasters in the passageway. Very little was found of the gate, but on both sides of it, the wall joined the rampart and the glacis at the point where it reached the natural higher level of the lower city. The city wall near the gate stood on lower ground and consisted of two parallel walls. All right, now I just want to give you a couple pictures, and again, these are black and whites because it goes back to the actual excavation under Yadin when they exposed the rampart wall and the glacis. So this first picture is the rampart wall. This is the main defensive wall, and you can see that there's a person standing right here, right? A normal-sized person. So it gives you a feel for how high and how steep this wall is. That's not the easiest wall to climb. And we're not sure, but it could have been lined with probably a white plaster, which would have made it even more difficult to scale. Because as it looks here, you can kind of put your feet in footholds here as you climb. But if it's been adhered with a plaster that's dried, now it's a slippery slope and you can't get up it. So I'm not sure if this had a plastering or not, but either way, it's going to be hard to get through this defensive wall. Almost impossible to get through it, but it's going to be hard to get over it, to get at the people in the city. This gives you an image now of, so you have the defensive wall, the rampart here, and here you have what is called a moat. I'm not sure if that's the same, going back to the days of the British knights and so forth, if this is that kind of moat that's filled with water. Again, you'd have to have a thorough plastering of the inside of the revetment wall and of the glacis here on the right. Both sides and the bottom would have to be plastered completely so that there are no holes to allow seepage of the water. So whether water was in here, we do not know. They could have thrown prickly branches in here, right, in that area that's called the moat. Any one of a number of things. They could have left it open And anyone who is smart enough or agile enough to climb up the wall and come down into this moat then had to climb the glacis. So any person inside the moat would all of a sudden be a sitting duck for arrow fire, right? So you could, using arrows or spears or whatever, you could kill people down in there. Not a problem. So however they used it as defense, it was a defensive chamber, if you will. All right, that takes us to the Middle Bronze 2C period, which is approximately 1668 to 1560 BC. So in the upper city, right, on the tell, we call this, the archaeologists who dug there called it the post-Stratum 16, Roman numeral 16, occupational level. And then down in the lower city, we call this Stratum 3. So we're getting later in time down in the lower city, right, and the stratum numbers go up. Why do they go up? Because when they start digging, the archaeologists go to the lower city and they start digging down. What do they get? The first occupational area they get to is the most recent one. So they call that 1, but it's the latest one in time. And you go below that and it's number 2, and it's the second latest in time, right? So go 3, 4, etc. So as we go forward in time with our survey, our numbers are going from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1, that kind of movement, just so you know. Okay, so this is Stratum 3 in the lower city. So in area C of Stratum 3, which dates to Middle Bronze Age 2C, many infant burials in jars were found beneath the floors of the houses. This doesn't mean that they were sacrificed while alive. It means they died for one reason or another. And as you probably know, in antiquity, you have a high infant mortality rate, right? So infant burials are going to be commonplace because they don't have the kind of medical attention that we have that can preserve babies, into adolescence or adulthood. So in area F, a large building with thick walls was constructed on a rectangular plan. Yadin interpreted this as a double temple that was consecrated to 2 deities. So probably it would have been a male, if that's the case. If he's right, it would have been twin temples or coordinate temples, probably one with a male deity and one with a female deity, and they would have been, the female deity would have been a consort of this male deity. In other words, they see it as a husband-wife kind of relationship between the 2 gods. That's usually how it works. The Temple of Stratum 3 in area H consisted of a broad hall with a small rectangular niche, a sort of holy of holies, if you will, on the northern side. 2 towers flanked the entrance to the hall, and the entire area around the temple was paved with small cobblestones. The gate of Stratum 3, built at the end of the Middle Bronze Age, and you can see on your chart, that's 1560 BC, right, the end of the Middle Bronze Age, is completely different than the gate of Stratum 4, both in plan and in position. The entrance to the gate was flanked by 2 large towers, and the southern tower is divided into 2 interconnected chambers. To this gate belonged an adjoining casemate wall. And a casemate wall basically is, so you have 2 sides of a wall, and then you have chambers inside, and each of the chambers is partitioned off. So you essentially have rectangles, one after another, after another, after another, with wall on one side and wall on the other side. Okay? The wall evidently continued for only a short distance before joining the rampart of the lower city. Stratum 3 was destroyed in a conflagration. That's a fancy word for a massive destruction by fire, exactly. Yep, which dates to the end of Middle Bronze 2C. And that is what we just mentioned on your handout, around 1560 BC or so. That's a general number. All right, now let's notice a couple things here. So remember there was a cobblestone pavement that was found? That's this. Do you see all these pretty little cobblestones? So it would have been a ground level, and they beautified it and made it easier to walk on, believe it or not. It was easier to walk on than otherwise, but with these small, rounded, probably smoothed rocks that form cobblestones. So If you think that all the old cobblestone cities in Europe and whatever are the oldest that exemplify this, no, you can go back into antiquity and see cobblestone. It's beautiful. The majority of the picture is actually it's just accumulation. It's just fill. It's just natural accumulation of material over time. But at the very base, you see this black line? That is known as a burn line. So this is a layer of ashes and brick that's on the floor. In our view, it looks to be the corner, but this isn't necessarily a corner. It's just that that's where the cut was made by the archaeologists who dug down to the cobblestone. So this is the last gate in Area K. And again, its usage would have ended around 1560 BC. All right, now we get to our period, a period of interest. Late Bronze Age 1. So at the end of this period is when Joshua and the Israelites destroy Hazor according to biblical chronology. Careful literal biblical chronology requires that this is the time period it happens, no matter what the critics say. The upper city is Stratum 15, Roman numeral 15. The lower city is Stratum 2. So the lower city is still occupied, right? Now, so probably, let me just recap one important moment. I've been suggesting to you that the city up until this time most likely is predominantly, maybe not totally, agreed, but probably predominantly Amorite. Now, we know that term from Moses' use of the Amorites, in the Pentateuch, especially in Genesis. So it's no surprise if this is true. There were Amorites in Canaan. And most likely they're connected to this coalition of cities that started in Middle Bronze 2A. And down in this site, they just grew and expanded in great number. So when Joshua destroys Hazor and kills all the people there, probably this is an Amorite dominated city, right? So the Amorite control ends with the destruction under Joshua. All right, the text for this is Joshua 11, 1 through 15. If we had time, if I had 2 hours with you instead of 1, we'd look at that text. We don't. There's the destruction of Hazor under Joshua and the commander of the armies of He Who Is. One of my favorite terms in the entire Bible. The most, IMHO, if you know that, in my humble opinion, the most important 3 verses in the entire book of Joshua, in the entire book, is Joshua 5, 13 through 15, because this is the appearance of God to Joshua. Now it came about when Joshua was near Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked. And take note, a man was standing opposite from him with his sword drawn in his hand. Who's this guy? So Joshua went to him and he said to him, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" Then he said, answering, right? The idea is answering. He said, "No, I instead have come as the commander of the armies of He Who Is." He Who is the translation of the covenant name of God. Most of your translations probably read captain. That's a bad translation. It's not like he's a middle-level officer, right, or a lower-level officer. He's the honcho. He's the commander of the armies. Who commands the armies of God, folks? God Himself. And ultimately, this is a pre-incarnate appearance of the second member of the Trinity that we know as Jesus Christ in the days of Herod. That's who appears to Joshua, not just anybody. Thus, and you can see this, it's reflected in the response of Joshua. Thus, Joshua fell on his face to the ground, and he bowed down. Then he said to him, "What has my Lord to say to his servant?" The commander of the armies of He Who Is said to Joshua, "Remove the sandals from your feet." Where did this happen before? With Moses at Mount Sinai, right? And that's another pre-incarnate appearance of the second member of the Trinity, called the angel of the Lord, which is a technical term for God Himself. "Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." Then Joshua did so. Isn't that great? Talk about comforting. You're ready as the human ruler. Moses dies, right? You're taking over. Okay, what am I up against here? You go into Canaan. All the people are larger than you. They're way more numerous. Your army consists of short people with pitchforks, right? And hoes. That's your army. And you're going against the Canaanites? Please. It's an exercise in futility. But everything changes when God himself appears to you with his sword and his glory at a place he calls holy. And essentially, he comforts Joshua to let him know that he is the one who would fight for Israel. Who is Israel's king? Not Saul, not David, not Solomon, not Rehoboam, not somebody else. God is their king. What did God say to Samuel when Samuel was all bent out of shape, that the Israelites rejected him as the leader of Israel? What did God say to Samuel? He said, "Don't worry about it, Samuel. They haven't rejected you. They've rejected me as king." That's what they did. So the implication was God was already king. And here's a picture of it. He's king. And he's going to conquer his land that he's going to give to his people, right? Isn't that beautiful? Okay, I'm taking too much time here. It's exciting, but we need to move on. So Joshua 10:11 says this: "Then Joshua turned back at that time and captured Hazor," right after he killed the armies of the northern kings, including the army of the king of Hazor, "and struck its king with the sword, for Hazor formerly was the head of all these kingdoms." So the Bible matches archaeology that tells us it was a city of 40,000 Amorites at the time. Folks, 40,000. And they conquered it. Isn't that amazing? Stratum 2 in the lower city represents the city that was inhabited during Late Bronze 1, which sat above a thick layer of ash. In Area F, part of the temple from Stratum 3 was reconstructed, while other architectural features remained in disuse. Nearby, burials contained bichromeware. That's pottery that's painted with two colors. That's all that means. In Area H, the temple plan of Stratum 2 is identical with that of its predecessor. However, the floor was raised and paved with large cobblestones, which were plastered with a white, limey clay that is typical of the Late Bronze Age 1. A large bama, which means high place, you read about that in the Bible, that's where pagan worship took place, at a high place, right? Not the worship of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the worship of local gods. Was found in the nearby court. So, if you look at, so on the left is the final Middle Bronze Age temple. And we're specifically looking at the temple that's in Area H, right? That's the temple. That's the plan for it. And then in the subsequent stratum, Late Bronze Age 1 stratum, there's the plan for it. It's almost exactly the same in its architectural design. You notice that? So the last Middle Bronze Age occupation has a temple that's exactly the same as the Late Bronze 1. If there's such continuity, what does that suggest to you about culturally the difference between the earlier and the later of the two occupational phases? What does that suggest? They're the same, right? Same people. Because when they get tired of using this temple because it's kind of old and ragged and breaking down, they tear it down and they build right on the same foundation. What do? Cookie cutter, they build the same kind of temple. And so you can see this reflects the same people living there before the Late Bronze 1 age and then in the Late Bronze 1 age, right? So both of these are pre-destruction by Joshua, right? Pre-destruction. Here is the Bama, or the high place, right here in the center of this image in this temple. So here's a picture of the temple in Area H that we just saw the plan for. Near the Bama, where the sacrificial animals were slaughtered, a single drainage channel was discovered that in part consisted of discarded incense stands. On the other side of the court was a pottery kiln that still contained a large number of votive bowls. To the east of the main bama was a heap of broken ritualistic vessels, including fragments of clay models of animals' livers that were used for priestly divination. So in the ancient world, you need to know this, that when you had these pagan religious cults that took place in certain cities, for some reason, I don't know the why behind it, but an animal's liver was this sacred organ for them. And that organ, from a cow or whatever animal, you take the liver and you can divine truth from it, according to them, right? So you look at the liver and you say, aha, I can see that your 3 youngest children will die next year of a plague. And I can see here that your crops aren't going to grow well next year, right? You can divine things from this as an ancient priest or religious person. And of course, half of it is made up and, it's a game, yeah. But that's what they did. So one of the fragments bore an Akkadian inscription that mentions various evil omens. And of course, an evil omen is like a bad sign. There's a certain bird that flew in over our city that never flies over our city. It's a bad omen. It's a bad, something bad's going to happen, because of that. So here's the dump, also known as a favisa. That's the Latin term for it, for discarded cultic vessels in this case. So the vessels that were used, usually clay vessels that were used for divination or for sacrificing, right? Or, so blood could be in one, or it could be filled with water to sprinkle on top of a sacrifice, whatever it is. All of those implements were ritualistically broken here in this favisa, this discarded dump for these objects. Miniature votive vessels from within Stratum 2's pottery kiln in Area H of Hazor's lower city are here. So this is the area where a certain potter actually did his work. He made pots in this part of the in this part of the lower city. This is Stratum 2 down in the lower city. And so here's a picture once they've been excavated and cleaned, all these beautiful vessels that he made that he was going to sell. Now think about this. He was alive, evidently, at the end of Late Bronze Age 1, when the destruction under Joshua took place. This is his inventory. He was going to be selling these things, right? These were his wares to sell, to make money. All of a sudden, lo and behold, something happens, and he can't sell his inventory anymore. Why? Is it a bad year for sailing? Did they have a COVID outbreak? Probably not. They had a different outbreak. It was called death to all of the inhabitants. Why else would a potter leave this huge inventory here, just sitting in his, near his kiln, in his warehouse? Makes no sense. Now, let's look at this cow's liver, because it was inscribed with Akkadian wording. Look at this. One king is bending down another. An enemy is attacking my country. So here it is, the end of Late Bronze 1. The time of Joshua's destruction. This guy's writing on this clay model of a cow, probably a cow's liver, that an enemy is attacking my country. Wow. Probably fear and trembling with this. Forgiveness will be granted to whom? To the men. By whom? By the god. Probably the god refers to the patron deity of Hazor, or at a minimum to this potter's his own favorite deity. And so he's saying, these people who are attacking us, who are coming after our country, our countrymen, and wanting to take us out, I guess we're going to forgive them, or my God is going to forgive them, right? Because of what they're doing against us. So the handwriting is on the wall, right? This potter sees what's happening, and he's documenting an invasion by some foreign people. A servant will rebel against his Lord. The second fragment, Ishtar, the goddess of war, will consume the land. There it is. Ishtar will consume the land. The goddess of war will consume the land. My country, my city is about to be destroyed. That's what he's saying. Nergal, the solar deity, will do such and such. And then it says, the gods of the city will return. This guy, for him, it's a done deal. It's as if the city is already destroyed. He's already envisioning that the gods who were protecting the city are gone. They all left the city. All that's left is for the mop-up job to take place, for the rest of the city to be destroyed, and for the people, theoretically, to be killed. Do you see this? Do you see the tension? This is right in the midst of the time of the destruction of the city. This attests to the destruction under Joshua. All right, the last thing that I'll show you. I'm going to skip ahead. Okay, look at this. This is a burn line. A burn line is an area that shows that destruction has taken place. And when I got to the site, I heard about the earlier excavations before I got there, back in 2001, 2002, and I asked my area supervisor, Sharon Zuckerman, can you show me signs of the late Bronze Age 1 destruction? She said, oh yeah, no problem. So we climbed over some thickets, we climbed a small barbed wire fence, we didn't get hurt, and we went down into this area, and she said, oh, let me show you some areas. Here, see that? That's all burn line. Late Bronze Age 1 city destruction. See this? Burn line. And this oval, that's all burn line. And this is fill that's been dumped on top of the charred remains. And there's a cobblestone pavement here that dates to late Bronze Age 2. That's the time of Deborah and Barak. So somebody had to rebuild the city after the destruction. Do you see how severe the destruction is? That it's that thick of a burn line, right? Remember the burn line we saw with the Middle Bronze Age? It was this big. This one is like that. Here's burn material. Occupational gap, signs of the occupational gap. And then the cobblestone pavement above. So that shows you graphic signs of the destruction under Joshua of the city of Hazor that eliminated the Canaanite, the Amorite people who were living there, just as the Bible describes. And that destruction is just as great or greater than the destruction we didn't have time to look at, which is the destruction under Deborah and Barak in about 1234 BC. Pretty impressive, right? Physical signs of what God did that's recorded in Scripture. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the time we've had tonight to look at a little bit of the evidence that shows what was going on at Hazor. Clearly, from what this potter inscribed on this divinistic liver, we see great fear. We see a man who knew that the end was imminent, that destruction was about to take place, that an enemy had come, that they were about to be conquered. And Lord, they were conquered by an army of people who had pitchforks and hoes, which shows that it's truly a work of you, that you would destroy the great city of Hazor with 40,000 inhabitants, many of whom could take up a sword and fight the people who would be coming to take their city and their land. But you determined that your people would be victorious. You determined that they needed to judge, to be the instruments of judgment against the sinful people of the land of Canaan. Thank you for how what we read about in your word at times like this can be seen and understood in what happened in the physical record. We praise you that it reflects the truthfulness of the Word of God. Thank you that it is life to us and that it gives us the ability to understand you, to know you, to be restored in our relationship to you, and to join you for all time to come, because you can give us new life in Jesus Christ, your Son. And we pray in his precious name. Amen. Thank you.